Staff Sergeant Reese Brennan's muscular arm locked around Lieutenant Commander Sarah Garrett's throat on the mat. Sarah's face was turning red as she struggled for breath. Tap, tap, tap. Her open hand slapped against Brennan's arm, the universal sign to stop. But he didn't stop. A shocked hush fell over the training hall. Dozens of trainees and instructors stood around the mats, eyes wide as their instructor held the choke far past any acceptable limit. Sarah's vision began to blur, her boots scrabbled weakly against the mat, her lungs burned. Still, Brennan's grip did not loosen. At last, just before she blacked out, Brennan released her. Sarah collapsed forward, gasping as air flooded back into her lungs. She coughed, pressing a hand to her bruised neck. Brennan stepped back with a cool, unbothered expression. "That's how quickly it can happen," he said flatly, sweeping his gaze over the silent onlookers. "In real combat, the enemy won't stop just because you tap out." His voice echoed in the tense hall. No one spoke. Sarah pushed herself up, shaky but determined not to stay down. She stood with a wince, meeting Brennan's eyes with a cold, unflinching stare. A red band was swelling on her throat where his arm had been. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. In that stare was a promise: this isn't over. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Just days earlier, Sarah had been sitting in a windowless briefing room deep beneath Naval Operations Command in Norfolk, Virginia. She arrived 10 minutes early, alone with her thoughts at a cold metal table. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence as she waited, back straight and hands clasped to hide a slight tremor. 6 months had passed since her mentor, Master Chief Wade Hollister, died during what the official report called a training accident. 6 months since Sarah began to suspect it was no accident at all. The heavy door swung open and Admiral James Carson stepped in. Sarah stood at attention, but the Admiral waved for her to sit. He offered a quiet nod of condolence. He had known Hollister too. Carson's expression turned grave. He explained that at the Coronado Combat Training Annex where Hollister died, there had been quiet complaints about an instructor, Staff Sergeant Reese Brennan, pushing training into brutality. Nothing was ever made official, and no names were attached, but the rumors were there. Sarah's stomach tightened. Coronado was the heart of SEAL training, but this annex was a joint close combat program. Wade Hollister had been out there on temporary duty when he fell to his death from a fast rope tower. A rope anchor that just happened to fail. Hollister had been looking into this annex when he died, Carson said, sliding a photograph from his folder. It showed Brennan in uniform, sharp-featured and confident. "And I don't believe in coincidences, Lieutenant Commander." Sarah's jaw set. Her mentor had survived decades of war, only to die stateside in a freak mishap. She had never believed it. "It wasn't an accident," she said quietly. "It was murder dressed up as an accident." Admiral Carson nodded gravely. Officially, nothing pointed to foul play, only whispers. But the circumstances of Hollister's death, a fast rope anchor failing on a routine drill, seemed too unlikely. It happened in Brennan's domain, and Carson suspected, as Sarah did, that something was very wrong at that annex. "I want you to go in as our eyes and ears for 60 days, Carson said. "An oversight assignment. Observe and ensure everything is by the book. If something's off, find out." Sarah didn't even need to think. She owed Hollister that much and more. "I'll go," she replied firmly, resolve burning in her chest. Hollister's death would not be in vain. Carson managed a faint, tired smile. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Be careful. Brennan isn't acting alone. Captain Marshall Teague, his former CO, protects him. Teague's a true believer in Brennan's aggressive methods. You're not just up against one man, it's a whole mindset." Sarah took the folder with Brennan's photo and file. She felt Hollister's presence strong in her heart. He had been more than a mentor. He had literally saved her life once, pulling her out of a kill zone in Afghanistan. She would do this for him. She looked Carson in the eye. "With all due respect, Admiral, they picked the wrong sailor to mess with. I won't let Wade's death mean nothing." The next day, Sarah arrived at the Combat Conditioning Annex in Coronado. It looked nothing like the glossy recruitment brochures, more like a sun-beaten cluster of prefabricated buildings and sand-coated obstacles, with a corrugated metal warehouse for a training hall. An ugly stepchild corner of the base. The late afternoon sun hung low and golden as she stepped inside the vast training hall. Conversations hushed as she entered. The air smelled of sweat, rubber, and old canvas. Groups of Marines and sailors were wrapping up drills, but most paused to gawk at the sight of a Navy lieutenant commander in their gritty domain. And a woman at that. 3 men broke away and walked toward her with the confident stride of those in charge. In the center was Staff Sergeant Reese Brennan, exactly as in the photo, mid-30s, tall and powerfully built, with granite-hard features and calculating eyes. To his right hovered a young Marine corporal, the name Beckett on his name tape, who kept his gaze down. On Brennan's left was a burly Navy petty officer. All of them looked battle-hardened and fit. It was Brennan, though, who commanded attention. The other 2 seemed almost like satellites orbiting his authority. Brennan greeted her with a firm handshake and a cordial smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome to the Annex, ma'am. We've heard you'll be observing our program for a while." He made a point of using the word observing, as if to say she was just a spectator here. Sarah met his iron grip with her own steady squeeze. "That's right, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Garrett," she said evenly. "I'm here to ensure everything runs according to Navy and Marine Corps standards and protocols. I'm sure I won't have to interfere as long as that's the case." Brennan gave a short laugh and released her hand. "Of course. We run a tight ship here." "Safety and standards," he replied almost piously. A couple of nearby instructors exchanged subtle smirks. "Glad to hear it," Sarah said, offering a polite smile. "I went through some pretty tough training myself back in the day. I know the difference between tough and reckless." Brennan's eyes narrowed just a hair. "We forge warriors here, Lieutenant Commander. That sometimes means pushing limits. Within the bounds of regs, naturally," Sarah added softly. "Naturally," Brennan echoed, his grin thinning. After that delicate dance of words, a silence stretched. Sarah could feel the weight of the entire room's attention. Brennan was sizing her up, trying to decide if she was a threat or just an inconvenience. For her part, she noted every bruise on the trainees, every nervous, deferential glance cast toward the staff sergeant. The undercurrents of fear were already evident. Brennan finally broke the silence. He turned and beckoned to the young Marine beside him. "Beckett, show the Lieutenant Commander our admin office and get her whatever access she needs." "Yes, Staff Sergeant," Corporal Beckett answered smartly. He stepped forward, giving Sarah a quick nod. Brennan held Sarah's gaze one more moment and added, almost as a warning masked as hospitality, "If you have any questions or want a hands-on feel for our methods, ma'am, my door's always open." Sarah returned a steady look. "I'm sure I'll see everything I need to, Staff Sergeant. Maybe I'll even join a session or 2, if that's allowed." Brennan's eyebrows lifted in surprise or amusement. "Looking forward to it," he said, that wolfish grin flashing for an instant. With that, Sarah followed Corporal Beckett across the training floor. She could feel Brennan's eyes drilling into her back. As she left the hall, low murmurs picked up behind her. The stage was set, and the first round of this silent contest was over. The real test was just beginning. Corporal Beckett led Sarah down a short corridor to a cramped administrative office. He fumbled with a set of keys and opened the door to a room barely big enough for a desk, a filing cabinet, and a humming computer. As the door closed, the noise of the training hall faded, leaving them in quiet. Beckett busied himself booting up the computer, studiously avoiding eye contact. In the glow of the monitor, Sarah could see he was young, early 20s, and looked like he hadn't slept well in weeks. His hand shook as he navigated the login screen. "I can pull up the training logs and injury reports for you, ma'am," he offered softly. Sarah gently shut the office door, ensuring privacy. "Thank you, Corporal," she said. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Before we get into that, you should know you can speak freely with me. Off the record." Beckett's back stiffened slightly, but he still stared at the screen. "Yes, ma'am," he murmured. Sarah decided direct honesty was the best approach. "I know about Master Chief Hollister," she said quietly. "I was there when they wrote the report. And I saw that you gave a statement about what happened, then withdrew it." Beckett's fingers froze on the keyboard. A tremor passed through his shoulders. "It's all right," Sarah continued. "Whatever the reason, I'm not here to judge you. But I do need to know the truth. Please, Beckett." Marine to Marine. What really happened that day? For a long moment, the only sound was the whir of the computer's fan. Then Beckett sagged into the chair, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. "Ma'am, I should have said something then," he choked out. "I should have stopped it." Sarah pulled the room's only other chair over and sat down across from him. Her voice was gentle. "Stopped what?" Beckett lifted his face, eyes wet. Once he began, the words came tumbling out in a flood. He told her how he'd been present when Master Chief Hollister fell. How, an hour beforehand, he had spotted Staff Sergeant Brennan up on the tower, apparently inspecting or tinkering with the ropes and anchor bolts. How, during the exercise, Hollister's rope inexplicably gave way. One second he was descending, the next he was just falling, Beckett whispered, voice cracking. He hit the concrete from 50 feet. We couldn't do anything." Sarah's throat tightened, but she kept her composure. "I knew something was off," Beckett continued. "After they took Master Chief's body, I climbed up the tower myself. One of the main anchor bolts was almost completely unscrewed. Ma'am, someone loosened it, on purpose." His jaw clenched. "There's no doubt in my mind, Brennan sabotaged that rope." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, a wave of sorrow and fury washing over her. It took all her discipline not to react. "I went to Captain Teague," Beckett went on bitterly. "I told him everything I saw. And he basically chewed me out, told me I must be mistaken, that I was in shock and seeing things. When I insisted, he got real quiet and said if I spread false allegations about a decorated war hero, I'd wreck my own career. He said I wasn't cut out for the pressure if I was imagining things like that." Beckett wiped the tears from his cheeks, anger creeping into his expression. "He ordered me to drop it, so I did. I retracted my statement, and I've hated myself for it every day since. Master Chief Hollister was a good man. He didn't deserve what happened. None of them do." Sarah leaned forward, her voice low and intense. "Corporal, look at me." Beckett raised his eyes. "You were put in an impossible position. Speaking up against a staff sergeant and a captain as a junior Marine, I understand why you were afraid." Beckett's face crumpled in shame. "I failed him," he whispered. "I was a coward." "No. You're here now," Sarah said firmly, "and you can still help make this right. I need you, Beckett. I need you to tell the truth, officially, on the record, when the time comes. I promise you I will have your back. You will not be alone." Beckett stared at her, the conflict clear in his young face. He was terrified, but also desperate for redemption. He took a shaky breath. If I do that, ma'am, they'll come after me. Teague, Brennan, they could destroy me." Sarah straightened to attention even while seated. "Not if we shine a big enough light on this. Admiral Carson, the base commander, there behind me. If we show undeniable proof, neither Brennan nor Teague will be able to touch you. The truth will protect you, Beckett. And I will protect you, as best I can." Beckett's eyes searched hers for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly at first, and with growing resolve. "I'll do it. I'll testify. I won't back down again." A small, grateful smile found its way onto Sarah's lips. She reached out and squeezed Beckett's shoulder. "Good man. Now ask yourself, what would you have done in his place? It's easy to say you'd speak up for what's right, but when your career and reputation are on the line, that kind of courage is easier said than done." Before leaving the little office, Sarah had Beckett copy all relevant digital records, injury reports, logs, anything that might hint at Brennan's methods, to a secure drive. She also quietly encouraged him to jot down names of anyone else who might have been hurt or seen misconduct. Beckett, relieved to finally unburden himself, rattled off a couple of names. A Private Rodriguez put in the hospital by a discipline session, a Navy petty officer who mysteriously broke an arm. It was a pattern. Late that night, Sarah sat on her bunk in the barracks, the base finally quiet around her. Using an encrypted app, she sent Admiral Carson a succinct update. Have credible witness. Evidence of sabotage. Carson's reply came within a minute. Proceed with extreme caution. You're being watched. Sarah locked her phone and exhaled. Extreme caution. She already felt eyes on her. Brennan's, Teague's. This place was a snake pit, and she had just rattled its tail. Still, as she lay back on the cot, she allowed herself a sliver of hope. She wasn't alone now. The truth was starting to surface, and once it did, it would be more powerful than their threats. She closed her eyes, determined and unafraid. They would only get one shot at this. She intended to make it count. The next morning, Sarah observed Staff Sergeant Brennan running a scheduled hand-to-hand training session with the new trainees. Outwardly, he was the model instructor, demonstrating hold safely, releasing at the very first tap, barking out clear safety reminders. To a casual observer, Brennan looked every bit the ideal teacher, tough, fair, and utterly professional. But Sarah noticed the nervous energy rippling beneath the surface. The trainees moved with almost panicked obedience. When Brennan's gaze swept over them, they straightened up like frightened deer. Their laughter, when it occurred, was forced and fleeting. And whenever Brennan glanced over at her, the entire group fell silent, as if no one dared draw attention. It was obvious to Sarah that this was a performance put on for her benefit. Brennan was showing her exactly what she was supposed to see, and concealing what he didn't want her to see. She jotted notes on her clipboard, keeping her expression neutral, but inside her resolve hardened. The fear in those young Marines' eyes told her everything. After the session, Brennan wiped his brow and gave Sarah a courteous nod. We'll be doing some advanced conditioning drills tomorrow night, Lieutenant Commander, he mentioned casually. You're welcome to observe if you like. There it was, a subtle invitation wrapped in a challenge. Sarah returned the nod. I'll be there, she answered. That evening, as Sarah reviewed the day's paperwork in her quarters, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it and read, Voluntary night session tomorrow. 2400. Off the record. That was all it said, but she knew it had to be from Beckett. This was what they'd been waiting for. Brennan's true face would show when he thought official eyes were away. Sarah's heart thumped a little faster, equal parts anticipation and caution. She tapped back a single word, Roger, then deleted the message. The trap was moving into place. Before dawn the next day, Sarah returned to the annex alone, moving through the dim, empty halls with only her small red lens flashlight cutting the darkness. She wanted to scout the ground on her own terms. Eventually, she found a tiny security room with a wall of video monitors. Most of the screens showed static or frozen images. She rifled through the maintenance logs and found exactly what she suspected, the cameras covering critical areas, like the fast rope tower and certain corners of the mat room, had a habit of malfunctioning at suspicious times. Always during late night or unscheduled sessions. The timing was too perfect to be anything but deliberate. Sarah snapped photos of the logs as evidence. When she stepped back into the corridor, nearly bumping into someone, her hand went to the pepper spray on her belt. Easy there, came a low voice. The figure stepped into a weak overhead light. It was an older man in civilian clothes, hair iron gray and face lined. Despite the polo shirt and khakis, he had the unmistakable bearing of a career Navy SEAL. Sarah recognized him from the base records. Command Master Chief Dalton Reeves, retired. A close friend of Hollister's who had taken a contractor job here. Master Chief Reeves, she greeted softly, relaxing her stance. He gave her a long, appraising look. In that moment, both of them knew the pretenses were over. Lieutenant Commander Garrett, he replied, equally soft. Then, with a small, sad smile, Wade's girl. Sarah's throat tightened. She hadn't heard anyone call her that in years, but Hollister had indeed been like a father to her. You knew, she whispered. About all of it? Reeves glanced around the empty hallway and gave a curt nod. I've been waiting for someone like you, he said. Wade knew something was rotten here. Before the accident, he documented everything he could. The older man's jaw tensed. I'm certain Brennan tampered with that rope. And I am damn sure it wasn't the first time he crossed the line. Sarah felt both relief and anger bubbling up. Why didn't anyone act sooner? Reeves let out a breath. No proof. And the ones who tried to speak up, well, you've seen what happened to Beckett. Teague made sure to snuff out any challenges. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and produced a small external hard drive. Wade anticipated that. So he set up a little insurance policy. Sarah took the drive, her brow furrowed. Hollister installed a few hidden cameras around the annex, completely independent of the base system, Reeves explained quietly. He caught a lot on there. Extra chokehold sessions, injuries, you name it. I've been maintaining that network since he's been gone, waiting for the right person to hand this to. He patted the drive in her hand. Everything's on there. Sarah stared at the device, a swell of gratitude and grief washing over her. Thank you for keeping this safe. Reeves nodded. Tonight's session, Brennan's going to test you, push you. I'll be recording, and these, he tapped the drive, already have plenty from the past. You just get him to show his true colors one more time. Oh, he will, Sarah said, a steely edge in her voice. He won't be able to resist. Reeves gave the ghost of a smile. Wade said the same about him, that his ego would hang him if given rope enough. Sarah felt a pang at the mention of Wade. One way or another, after tonight, Brennan is done. Reeves laid a hand on her shoulder, fatherly. Be careful. That bastard is dangerous, not just strong. He truly believes what he's doing is right. That makes him twice as deadly. I know, Sarah replied. I will be. They parted with a shared understanding. This was for Hollister. That night, close to 2,000 hours, Sarah returned to the training hall dressed in PT gear like the other off-duty volunteers. The atmosphere inside was markedly different from the daytime. The lights were dimmer, and a few portable lamps cast flickering shadows across the mats. A low thrum of music played from a speaker, giving the space a raw, intense vibe. About a dozen Marines and a couple of sailors stood in a loose circle, anticipating the unofficial session. Many of them had eager, nervous grins, the look of men about to prove themselves in a feared gauntlet. Brennan's face lit with a predatory smile when Sarah slipped in among the others. Glad you could join us, Lieutenant Commander, he drawled, dispensing with the ma'am entirely. Here, she wasn't an officer evaluator, she was just fresh meat. Sarah gave a single nod, saying nothing. The tension in the air was palpable as Brennan kicked off the session. He started with brutally intense calisthenics, push-ups, burpees, flutter kicks, all in rapid succession with no rest. After that came hand-to-hand drills where he paired people off to spar until one dropped. Brennan ran them through brutal drills that pushed far beyond safe limits. Trainees were dropping to hands and knees from exhaustion and pain, but no one dared quit or complain. Brennan circled among them, barking, "Come on, you want to be tough or not? The enemy isn't going to cut you slack." Sarah forced herself to hang back on the sidelines, just another participant observing. Her muscles itched to intervene when a young private's face turned blue in a choke, or when a corporal's arm was twisted at a dangerous angle. But she held her tongue. This was Brennan's show, and he was making his point. Here, I am king. After nearly an hour of this abuse, sweat drenched every participant, and the air was rank with it. A few men nursed bloody noses, one limped, having sprained an ankle on a takedown. Brennan finally clapped his hands. "All right, bring it in," he called. The trainees gathered around, breath heaving, faces gleaming with sweat under the dim lights. Brennan's gaze swung until it found Sarah. He gave a slight tilt of his head and a chilling grin. "Lieutenant Commander Garrett, you look like you've got plenty left in the tank." Sarah knew what was coming but still felt a jolt of adrenaline. "I manage," she replied evenly. Brennan spread his arms in an inviting gesture. "How about you and I show these pups a real demonstration, operator to operator?" His tone was almost friendly, but his eyes were nothing but challenge. A ring of expectant, uneasy faces turned to Sarah. This was the gauntlet being thrown. If she refused, she'd be marked as a coward. If she accepted, she was stepping into a fight with a man who had likely killed her mentor and would have no qualms hurting her badly. Sarah's heart thudded once, hard. Then she stepped forward onto the mat. "All right, Staff Sergeant," she said quietly, "show me what you've got." A ripple of energy went through the spectators. They backed up to widen the circle. Sarah and Brennan squared off under the yellowish light, two figures of equal height but very different builds. Brennan with his muscular bulk, Sarah with her lean, coiled readiness. They circled one another and traded a few swift holds and counters. Sarah's speed and technique drew a few startled gasps from the onlookers. She was clearly far more skilled than they expected. But Brennan's strength was formidable, and his grin only grew wider the more she resisted him. With a sudden burst of aggression, Brennan swept Sarah's legs out from under her. In a blink, he was on her back as they hit the mat. His arms snaked around her neck, locking in a crushing rear choke. Sarah's mind went cold and focused. She felt the chokehold clamp tight under her chin. Instinctively, she tucked her chin down and slapped her hand against his forearm once. A tap out. Brennan didn't release. Panic beat at the edges of her mind. She slapped again, harder, twice. Nothing. Brennan's grip was iron. A concerned murmur rose from the circle of spectators. Sarah's vision tunneled as she struggled in vain. It was exactly the same cruelty he'd shown others, now brazenly inflicted on her. Finally, when Sarah's limbs started to go limp, Brennan let go. She rolled onto her side, choking and gulping air. Someone nearby cursed under his breath. Another just looked on in pale silence. Brennan got to his feet, only slightly winded. He scanned the stunned faces around him. "Remember this," he said, voice almost pleasant. "The enemy doesn't stop just 'cause you tap. Better to find out here than out there." He cast a glance at Sarah, who was on one knee, still coughing, and added coolly, "Training like this will keep you alive when it counts." Sarah wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Anger and humiliation warred with raw physical pain in her throat. But she forced herself up. She refused the half-offered hand of a nearby sergeant and stood on her own, legs unsteady, but pride intact. Brennan gave a satisfied little nod to the group. "That's it for tonight." "Dismissed?" The trainees dispersed in uneasy silence, not sure what to do with what they'd just witnessed. Some glanced at Sarah in shock or newfound respect. Others hurried out as if they'd rather forget it. Beckett hovered at a distance, eyes full of concern and apology. Sarah caught his gaze and gave a tiny, imperceptible shake of her head. Not here. She wouldn't show any hint of alliance or weakness in front of Brennan. In the locker room, once Sarah was sure she was alone, she gripped the sink and stared at herself in the mirror. A dark red band already encircled her throat. Her hands trembled with residual adrenaline and rage. She took out her phone, turned the camera on herself, and snapped a photo of the ugly bruise, ensuring the timestamp was visible. Evidence. A soft knock came at the back door of the locker room. Sarah tensed until a voice hissed, "It's Reeves!" She opened the door to let Dalton Reeves slip inside. The retired Master Chief held the laptop under one arm and looked her over with worry. "Are you all right?" he asked in a low voice. Sarah's throat was raw when she spoke. "I'll live." Reeves set the laptop on the bench and flipped open the screen. Grainy thermal footage filled it. The view from one of Hollister's hidden cameras up in the rafters. It showed in ghostly contrast the scene that had just unfolded. The figures of Sarah and Brennan grappling, her taps clearly visible, Brennan's prolonged choke unmistakable. A timestamp ran in the corner. Reeves paused the video at the moment Brennan finally released her. It showed Sarah slumped and gasping, and Brennan standing over her. 11 seconds had passed from first tap to release. "Damning, isn't it?" Reeves muttered. Sarah nodded, her eyes on the screen. Seeing it from this angle made her stomach turn. Brennan's cold execution of the choke, and her own helpless form going limp. It was worse than she'd felt in the moment. "One incident might not be enough," she rasped. Reeves looked at her sharply. "We've got a whole drive of incidents. He'll claim this was an accident, a misunderstanding in the heat of training, Sarah said, thinking out loud. Her voice was hoarse but steadying. No, we need to drag this into the daylight. In front of the chain of command. A plan began forming even as she spoke. Sarah outlined it to Reeves in a quick, urgent whisper. She would request a formal evaluation of the training program, something even Teague couldn't easily block. At that evaluation, with high-ranking officers and a JAG present, Brennan would have to demonstrate techniques. Sarah herself would volunteer to be his partner. She knew, given the chance, Brennan's ego and habits would lead him to do exactly what he'd done tonight. Only this time, it would be in front of official cameras and witnesses. Reeves listened, a grin spreading slowly across his weathered face. Spoken like a sniper setting up the perfect shot, he said. Baiting the target into the open. Sarah managed a faint smile. Her neck ached, and her head was pounding, but a spark of determination was burning bright within her. It's the only way to nail him to the wall. Reeves nodded. All right. I'll make sure all of Wade's hidden cameras are up and running for the evaluation. We'll have backups of backups. He closed the laptop and squeezed Sarah's shoulder gently. You sure you're up for this? After what he did tonight? Sarah winced, testing her bruised throat. It hurt like hell, but pain was transient. Justice would be lasting. Master Chief, she said, using Reeves's old title, I've never been more sure. 2 hours later, as dawn was breaking, Sarah sat at a computer in the admin office drafting a formal memo. She requested a combat readiness evaluation of the Annex's training protocols, specifically focusing on chokehold application and tap-out procedure. She worded it in dry, bureaucratic language and invoked her authority as an oversight officer. By midday, the response came. Approved. The evaluation would be in 2 days. Base Commander Captain Richard Walsh himself would oversee it, with Captain Teague and a Judge Advocate General, JAG officer in attendance. Staff Sergeant Brennan was to serve as lead demonstrator. Sarah folded the confirmation printout and tucked it into her pocket. It was on. The stage would be public and official. Not long after, Corporal Beckett caught up with Sarah behind one of the storage sheds, away from prying eyes. He looked anxious. Ma'am, he whispered, Captain Teague pulled me aside this morning. He reminded me what happened last time I talked. Beckett's face was pale. He basically said if I even think of mentioning Master Chief Hollister or any accusations, I'm done. He said he'd destroy me. Sarah's jaw clenched. Teague was already moving to protect himself and Brennan. Listen to me, Beckett, she said quietly but firmly. He's scared. And he should be. We have the truth on our side now. Don't let him rattle you. Beckett nodded uncertainly, then looked around and lowered his voice even more. I did something, just in case, he said. From his pocket, he pulled out his personal phone. With a few taps, he brought up a video file and handed the phone to Sarah. On the screen, shaky but clear, was a video of the previous night's session. Beckett must have discreetly recorded it from the edge of the circle. The footage showed Brennan's arm around Sarah's neck, her tapping hand, and Brennan's unyielding hold. The audio even caught muffled gasps and someone whispering, Jesus, he's gonna kill her. It was harrowing to watch. Sarah's eyes widened. You recorded this? Beckett nodded. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it, but I figured it was too important not to capture. If you want it, ma'am, it's yours. Sarah exhaled in relief. Good thinking. She quickly instructed him to send the video to her secure email, which he did, and then delete it from his phone entirely. No sense leaving ammo for Teague to find. Before they parted, Beckett swallowed and asked in a tremulous voice, Ma'am, are we really going to win? Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, looking him square in the eye. We will, she said, conviction ringing in her tone. Once the truth is out in the open, it's stronger than they are. They've bullied everyone in the dark. We're about to turn on the floodlights. Beckett drew himself up a bit, bolstered by her confidence. Yes, ma'am. As he jogged off, Sarah allowed herself a tight smile. The net was ready to close. In 48 hours, the quiet whispers and hidden evidence would erupt into a public reckoning. Brennan and Teague had no idea what was coming. 2 days later, the Annex's training hall looked completely different. The mats had been cleaned and arranged neatly, and rows of chairs lined one side of the space for an audience of evaluators and observers. A long table faced the mats, where Captain Walsh and the JAG officer would sit. Several high-definition cameras were mounted on tripods, all visibly recording. What was normally a rough-and-tumble gym had been transformed into something like an open courtroom. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Garrett stood off to the side of the mats, clad in her service dress khaki uniform. Her ribbon racks gleamed on her chest. Among them, 2 purple ribbons for her Purple Hearts and a bronze star with a V device for valor. Most notable of all, the gold seal trident was pinned above her left pocket. Just below it, she had fastened a second trident, older, worn, its gold finish dulled by time. It was Master Chief Hollister's trident. A quiet stir went through a few of the instructors and officers present when they noticed the doubled insignia. Those who knew, knew. At 0900 sharp, Captain Walsh, a salt-and-pepper-haired Navy officer and base commander, called the meeting to order. Seated beside him was the Marine, Captain Teague, his back ramrod straight and his face a mask of forced indifference. On Walsh's other side sat a Navy JAG attorney, introduced simply as Lieutenant Commander Vance, with a notebook and pen at the ready. Uniformed personnel filled the chairs, training officers from other departments, senior enlisted representatives, even a few medical staff. And ringed around the back were dozens of curious onlookers, off-duty instructors, trainees, anyone who'd caught wind that something big was about to go down. The hush in the room was heavy. "This evaluation has been convened at the request of Lieutenant Commander Garrett," Captain Walsh announced, projecting his voice. "We will be reviewing the close combat training protocols, specifically the application of chokeholds and proper recognition of trainee tap-outs. Staff Sergeant Brennan," he gestured to Brennan, "will serve as lead demonstrator." Brennan stepped forward onto the mat in his immaculate Marine Desert Utilities. He appeared composed and confident. "I'm here to demonstrate any techniques the review board would like, sir," he said crisply. Sarah stood with hands clasped behind her back, every inch the professional. Underneath, her heart was racing, but her face betrayed nothing. What followed first was a series of basic demonstration drills. Corporal Beckett, recently selected by Brennan as his assistant for this event, joined him on the mat, wearing protective pads. Brennan demonstrated textbook chokehold applications and releases. Each time Beckett tapped, Brennan released promptly. Brennan narrated in a calm instructor voice, explaining how, the moment a trainee taps, we immediately disengage to prevent injury. He was the picture of discipline and restraint. If Sarah had known better, she might have thought him an exemplary teacher. On the sidelines, Sarah watched the faces of the audience. Some appeared impressed, nodding along with Brennan's polished explanations. Teague sat with a smug little smile, as if to say, "I told you so." But others in the crowd, those who'd been in that hall at night, exchanged knowing, uneasy glances. After a series of flawlessly executed hold and release demonstrations, Captain Walsh consulted briefly with JAG Officer Vance, then addressed Sarah. "Lieutenant Commander Garrett, as the requesting party, is there any particular scenario you feel hasn't been covered?" Sarah stepped forward, her mouth dry but her voice steady. "Yes, Captain. We have seen compliant demonstrations. I would like to see a chokehold applied in a more realistic, resisted scenario, to simulate an actual sparring situation." She paused deliberately. "With your permission, I'd like to volunteer myself as the resisting subject, to truly test the response to a tap-out under pressure." A murmur of surprise rustled through the spectators. Teague sat up, eyes narrowing. "Captain," he interjected with a forced chuckle, "I'm not sure that level of participation by an evaluating officer is necessary. We wouldn't want Lieutenant Commander Garrett to be in harm's way for a demo." Walsh held up a hand. "Your concern is noted, Captain Teague." He looked at Sarah. "Lieutenant Commander, are you certain you want to do this?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied firmly, meeting Walsh's gaze. "I'm fully trained, and I trust Staff Sergeant Brennan will handle it professionally." Walsh turned to Brennan. "Staff Sergeant, do you consent to this demonstration?" Brennan's smile was thin and his eyes keen. "Happy to oblige, sir." Teague could do nothing but press his lips together as Sarah removed her khaki blouse, revealing a navy blue PT shirt beneath, and stepped onto the mat in front of Brennan. There were a few audible intakes of breath. Everyone in the room leaned forward. They began to circle each other. For a brief moment, Sarah wondered if Brennan would actually hold back, knowing the stakes. The thought evaporated as soon as she saw the flicker in his eyes, that hunger. He wasn't going to hold back, he couldn't. Brennan fainted low, then surged forward. Sarah reacted on instinct, grappling with him. The two of them struggled in earnest. It was not a choreographed, gentle demonstration. It was a real fight. Brennan was strong and cunning, and Sarah had skill and speed. She landed a quick strike and managed to break one hold, drawing a few gasps and a spark of applause from someone. Brennan's pride only drove him harder. He caught her with a leg sweep that sent Sarah to her knees. In a blink, Brennan was behind her. His arm snaked around Sarah's neck and clamped down tight. The room collectively tensed. Sarah gritted her teeth. She knew this was it. Brennan cinched the rear choke with his full strength. Sarah slapped her hand against his arm, the tap loud and clear. Nothing happened. She slapped again, flailing slightly now. Brennan's grip remained like steel. She tapped. A Navy chief in the front row stood up in alarm. Beckett had been counting under his breath from the second her hand hit Brennan's arm. Now his voice rang out, sharp and loud. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each number was a thunderclap in the stunned silence. Sarah's face was turning red. Her boots drummed against the mat as she fought reflexively for air. 5, 6, 7, 8. 2 medical corpsmen stepped forward, uncertain if they should intervene. 9, 10, 11. Beckett's count reached an appalling 11 seconds when Brennan finally released the chokehold. Sarah crumpled forward onto all fours, coughing violently. One of the corpsmen rushed to her side, but she waved him off as she struggled to get a breath in. The hall was in chaos. Multiple people were on their feet, voices overlapping in confusion and outrage. Captain Walsh's voice rose above the din. "Stand down, all of you." The authority in his tone froze everyone in place. The coughing, gasping lieutenant commander on the mat and the panting staff sergeant beside her became the focus of every eye. Brennan's face was flushed, whether from exertion or the realization of what he'd just done. "Sir," he blurted, holding his hands up as if in innocence. She was resisting. I released as soon as I realized she was tapping. "That is not true, sir." Beckett's young voice cut through Brennan's excuse. He tore off his headgear, stepping forward unbidden. His whole body trembled, but he raised his voice for all to hear. From the first tap to release, I counted 11 seconds. 11. And this isn't the first time. Staff Sergeant Brennan did the same thing to me in a voluntary session 3 months ago. He's done it to others. Private Rodriguez almost crushed his windpipe from a choke just like that. The room was dead silent except for Sarah's raspy breathing. Teague was on his feet, eyes blazing. "This is highly irregular." Captain Walsh silenced Teague with a glare so severe the Marine captain fell quiet mid-protest. Beckett wasn't finished. "Master Chief Hollister died in an accident here," he said, voice cracking but loud. "I believe. I know. Staff Sergeant Brennan made that happen. I saw him on the tower before the rope failed. And I was pressured to keep quiet about it." A collective gasp. Teague's face went ashen. Walsh looked like someone had doused him in cold water. Slowly, he turned to Sarah, who was now standing shakily with a corpsman's support. Her face was red, her voice a ragged whisper, but she managed to speak. "Show them the footage." At the back of the hall, Dalton Reeves had already positioned himself by the big screen. He plugged in the hard drive with Hollister's secret recordings. Within seconds, the large display lit up with grainy video. In one corner, an infrared scene showed Brennan the night before, holding Sarah in the choke beyond her taps. Another window popped up, archival footage of Brennan pinning a different trainee, who frantically tapped as Brennan kept throttling for a few extra seconds. Yet another clip, Brennan delivering a vicious neck crank on a recruit half his size during an off-record stress test. Multiple gasps and murmurs filled the air. On the screen, timestamp after timestamp, incident after incident, the pattern was undeniable. Captain Teague's voice suddenly barked out, shaky but defiant. "This footage is unauthorized. This isn't even admissible. Those cameras were hidden. This violates." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Vance, the JAG officer, stood up, calm and stern. "Captain Teague, sit down." Her legal voice sliced through his protest. "This is not a courtroom. It's an administrative review, and what I see is overwhelming evidence of a pattern of abusive conduct." Teague opened his mouth, but Vance went on, flipping through Sarah's prepared file of documents. "We also have reports here which, interestingly, show a history of attempted complaints that never formally went anywhere. I see notes that certain officers," she gave Teague a piercing look, "intervened to discourage those complaints. That is very troubling." Teague's face was now the color of chalk. He sank into his seat, staring straight ahead. Captain Walsh stepped forward, jaw tight. The disappointment and anger in his face was evident as he looked between Brennan and Teague. "Staff Sergeant Reese Brennan," he said, voice ringing with command authority, "effective immediately, you are relieved of duty. Turn yourself over to the military police." Two Navy Masters-at-Arms, the MPs, who had been standing by, approached Brennan. The staff sergeant's shoulders slumped. He nodded faintly and allowed them to take him by the arms. There was no fight left in him. The evidence on the screen had drained it out. Walsh then fixed Teague with a withering stare. "Captain Teague, you are hereby suspended from your duties, pending a full investigation into your conduct and complicity in this matter." Teague's mouth fell slightly open. He looked around as if for support, but found none. Under escort from a senior officer, he stood and walked out on unsteady legs, his career likely ruined. As Brennan was being led toward the exit, Sarah stepped into his path. The MPs halted, giving her a moment. Brennan wouldn't meet her eyes at first, but Sarah stood there, bruised and weary and victorious, until he finally did. Her voice was quiet enough not to carry far, but Brennan flinched as if struck. "Wade Hollister believed in making warriors the right way," Sarah told him, raw emotion underlying her steadiness. "He gave everything to build people up. You could have been part of that legacy, Reese. But you chose ego and brutality instead." Brennan swallowed hard, eyes shiny. I was trying to make them strong," he mumbled, a last feeble defense. "No," Sarah replied, steel in her tone. "You were breaking them." Brennan closed his eyes at that, a tear escaping despite himself. He nodded once, a broken, tiny motion, and then allowed the MPs to escort him out into the daylight. For a long beat, the hall was silent except for the distant hum of the overhead lights. Captain Walsh broke the silence by approaching Sarah. Then, to the surprise of everyone present, he raised his hand in a crisp salute. Sarah, despite the ache in her body, snapped to attention and returned it. "At ease," Walsh said softly. His eyes were heavy with regret. "Lieutenant Commander Garrett, Sarah, I apologize on behalf of this command. We failed to see what was happening under our noses. Thanks to you, and those who had the courage to stand with you, we can begin to set it right." Sarah's throat constricted with emotion, and not from the bruises. She simply nodded. Behind Walsh, many others in the room, officers and enlisted alike, regarded her with a kind of reverence. In the back, Sarah saw Reeves standing with arms folded, giving her the slightest nod of respect, pride shining in his eyes. People began to file out, speaking in hushed, somber tones. Some stopped by Beckett and clapped him on the back or shook his hand, acknowledging his bravery. Others simply gave Sarah a subdued nod as they passed, as if unsure whether to congratulate her or apologize, or both. Within minutes, the hall was nearly empty. The truth was out, and an ugly chapter was coming to a close. Later that afternoon, as sunlight slanted through the now open doors of the training hall, Sarah found herself near the mats with Captain Walsh and Dalton Reeves. The evaluators and spectators were gone. The only sounds were distant seagulls and flags flapping outside. Walsh took off his cap and sighed. "Lieutenant Commander, the Navy and Marine Corps owe you one. This could have gone on who knows how much longer if not for you. He shook her hand firmly. "We can't undo what happened to Hollister, but we can honor him by learning from this." He cleared his throat, shifting to a formal tone. "I'd like you to consider taking charge of this program, Garrett. Rebuild it from the ground up. Make it into something Master Chief Hollister would be proud of." Sarah blinked, taken aback. For an instant she imagined Wade standing beside her, beaming with that gruff pride of his. She straightened. "It would be my honor, sir," she replied quietly. Reeves stepped forward then, holding a small wooden box. "Sarah," he said gently, "I have something that belongs to you." She opened the lid. Inside, on a bed of blue velvet, lay Wade Hollister's Navy Cross medal and a folded note, browned at the creases. Sarah recognized Wade's handwriting at once. Hands trembling slightly, she opened the note and read, "Finish what we started. I'm with you in spirit." A single tear escaped down Sarah's cheek. She pressed the note to her heart. In that moment, she allowed herself to truly grieve, not in despair, but in gratitude that she'd been able to carry out his last wish. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure if she was speaking to Reeves, to Walsh, or to Wade above. In the weeks that followed, Sarah threw herself into rebuilding the Annex's program. Every training session was now properly supervised and recorded. Off-the-books voluntary drills were abolished outright. Rules were reinforced. A tap-out must be honored immediately, no exceptions or excuses. A new anonymous reporting system was set up so any abuse of power could be flagged without fear of retaliation. Many of Brennan's former colleagues, now free of his shadow, adapted readily to the new regimen. They still trained ferociously. If anything, the standards became even more rigorous physically. But the culture had fundamentally changed. Toughness was no longer measured by how much humiliation or pain someone could endure in silence. It was measured by discipline, teamwork, and mutual respect. Sarah led by example, demanding excellence but never cruelty. Sergeant Beckett stood proudly as Sarah's right hand through it all. His once hunched shoulders straightened with confidence. He had found redemption in helping Sarah steer the ship right, and she knew Hollister would have been proud of him. One bright morning, Sarah gathered the newly selected instructors on the mats for the inaugural session of the reformed program. Sunlight poured in, illuminating a brand new brass plaque mounted on the wall. It was a dedication to Master Chief Wade Hollister, emblazoned with his favorite motto, "Discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment." Sarah addressed the assembled instructors, her voice clear and sure. She spoke of Hollister's philosophy, that the fiercest warriors uphold honor and discipline, never resorting to brutality against their own. Every trainee under their charge was a future comrade whose life might one day depend on this training. Their duty, Sarah impressed upon them, was to forge not only physical strength in these recruits, but character and trust as well. As she looked around at the attentive faces of the men and women who would carry this mission forward, Sarah felt hope blooming where fear once festered. When she finished her brief speech, a respectful silence hung in the air. She allowed herself a small, proud smile. They were turning a new page, one written in the spirit of Wade Hollister's values. From the back of the hall by the open doors, the morning light caught the edge of the plaque and the twin seal tridents on Sarah's uniform. In that radiant moment, she could almost sense Hollister's presence, as if he stood just behind her shoulder, nodding in approval at the legacy he had entrusted to her care. Sarah Garrett never sought recognition. Yet by standing up for what was right, she changed countless lives and preserved the honor of her community. Her quiet bravery ensured that a place meant to forge warriors would once again do so with honor. Her story reminds us that true courage often means having the strength to stand up when others won't. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.